Before we begin, what you're about to hear is not just a love story. It's a study in how the people who hurt us the most are often the ones who teach us what we're worth. And sometimes the strangest accidents lead us exactly where we were supposed to be. This is the story of Alara Voss, and it starts with a wrong elevator button. The rooftop restaurant on the 68th floor of Sterling Tower had 15 tables, each one costing more per evening than Alara Voss made in a month. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be on 52 at her best friend May's birthday dinner 20 minutes ago, but she'd pressed the wrong elevator button, the gold-framed one on the right instead of the regular one on the left. And now she was standing at the entrance of the Meridian Terrace with the Manhattan skyline blazing behind glass panels and absolutely no idea how to get back down without being noticed. She was wearing a blush pink dress she'd bought for $11 at a thrift store in Williamsburg 2 years ago. She'd taken it apart at the seams and had sewn the waist herself. She'd added a stitch at each shoulder to make it sit right. The shoes were her mother's nude pumps, half a size too big, stuffed with tissue paper at the toes. Her mother had danced in them at Alara's college graduation. She'd kicked one into the bushes, laughing. That was 3 years ago. Her mother had been alive then. On her wrist, a thin silver bracelet engraved with two words in her mother's handwriting. Keep going. Now pay attention to that bracelet because those two words, keep going, will come back at the end of this story in a way that might break you. Remember them. She turned to leave. That's when she saw him. Derek Hale, 4 tables away, arm draped across the back of a chair where a woman in a red dress sat, dark hair falling past her shoulders. Derek was laughing, chin up, teeth showing. That particular laugh he used when he wanted someone to feel like the center of the universe. He'd used it on Ara once for 14 months until the text. The text that said, "Let's be honest, Ara. You don't belong in my world. No hard feelings." Sent at 11:47 on a Tuesday night while she sat waiting for him at a restaurant with a basket of bread she hadn't touched and an anniversary dress she bought that afternoon. She'd left a $10 tip on an empty table and walked home in the rain. Let that sink in for a moment. 11:47 at night by text message. While she was sitting there waiting for him, there's a particular cruelty in making someone get dressed up for their own rejection. And the phrase, "no hard feelings." That's not kindness. That's a man making sure you can't be angry without looking unreasonable. It's emotional checkmate. 2 years ago, 2 years of rebuilding, and now he was 15 feet away, and the only path back to the elevator went directly past his table. If Derek saw her alone in a thrift store dress at a restaurant she'd entered by accident, she knew exactly what his face would do. That slight widening of the eyes, the flicker of pity, the confirmation. See, I was right. She would not give him that. In the corner of her vision, the nearest table, one man, glass of white wine barely touched, small vase of white roses. The chair across from him was empty, pulled out slightly as if someone had been expected. Alara didn't think. She crossed the space in 4 steps, pulled back the chair, sat down, and grabbed the leather menu from the table edge, pressing it against her face like a shield. Her hands were shaking so hard the pages rattled. "Please," she whispered, "pretend you know me. 5 minutes. My ex is sitting right behind us. I can't let him see me here alone." The man set his wine glass down. Gray blue eyes met hers over the menu's edge. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look annoyed. He leaned forward, close enough that she caught cedar and clean linen, and said, quiet enough for only her to hear, 5 minutes. I should probably order you a drink then, because the hardest part isn't pretending. It's pretending you're not shaking. Now think about what that line tells us about this man. He didn't ask why. He didn't hesitate. He didn't make her feel small for asking. In one sentence, he acknowledged her fear, offered help, and even made her feel a little less ridiculous. That's not charm, that's emotional intelligence. And it's the first sign that whoever this stranger is, he's nothing like the man sitting 4 tables behind them. He raised 2 fingers. A server appeared instantly. "A glass of the Whispering Angel Rosé for my guest," he said, voice slightly louder now. Natural, easy, as if she'd been expected all along. He'd ordered rosé. She didn't know how he'd known. It was the only wine she actually liked. Then he leaned back, lifted his own glass, and said at full volume, "You're late. I was starting to think you'd stood me up." One sentence, and the frame changed. She wasn't a panicked stranger. She was someone expected, someone waited for. Alara lowered the menu, forced a smile, and matched his tone. Sorry, taxi got stuck in Times Square. I avoid Times Square, he said, the way reasonable people avoid natural disasters. Despite everything, her hammering heart, Derek 4 tables away, she almost laughed. The server brought her wine. Enjoy your evening, he said to them both, smiling. The performance was seamless. Then, from the edge of her vision, Derek's head turned. A casual sweep of the terrace. Alara's body went rigid. If he looked 2 degrees right, he would see her face. The man across from her, without looking toward Derek, without any visible urgency, reached forward and shifted the vase of white roses 3 inches to the left. A tiny movement, but it placed the flowers directly between Derek's sightline and her face. He did it the way someone straightens a picture frame, automatically, as if the flowers had simply been in the wrong spot. He'd seen her freeze. He'd tracked the direction without turning his head, and he'd solved it with 3 inches of roses. That moment, the roses, is worth pausing on because it reveals something important. This man reads rooms. He tracks threats without turning his head. He solves problems before they fully form. That's not a skill you learn at dinner parties. That's a skill you learn in survival. And as we'll discover, Callister Wren knows a great deal about survival. Who are you? She asked. Callister Wren, he said, and you still haven't told me your name. 10 minutes passed. The 5 she'd asked for doubled and she barely noticed. The fear had faded to background noise, partly because Derek hadn't looked their way again, mostly because Wren was, against all probability, easy to talk to. Not charming the way Derek was charming. Compliments on schedule, eye contact held a beat too long, the whole performance. Callister asked questions and actually listened to the answers. And that difference between a man who performs interest and a man who actually has it is one of the most important things this story has to teach us. Because Derek's charm had a purpose. It was a tool for acquisition. Callister's attention had no agenda. It was just attention. And that, it turns out, is the rarest luxury in any room. What do you do? He asked. Graphic design, freelance, which is a polite way of saying unemployed with a nicer title. He exhaled through his nose. Not quite a laugh, but close. How's that working out? I have 3 clients who pay in cash and one who pays in leftover pasta. Living the dream. She paused. I'm also a waitress and I do menu layouts for restaurants. Sorry, you asked one question and I gave you my entire tax return. You gave me an honest answer. Most people here would have given me a title. You gave me a life. Something shifted in her chest. She covered it quickly. Your turn. What do you do that lets you sit alone where dinner costs more than my rent? Real estate, he said, and the boring kind. A man appeared at their table. Not the server, but someone older in a suit that had been made for his body alone. He bent slightly and said, Mr. Wren, the head chef wanted to know if you'd like the special tasting this evening. Mr. Wren, the difference in the man's posture was not how staff addressed a regular customer. This was how people addressed someone who could end their career or fund their retirement with a single phone call. Not tonight, James. Tell Marcus the lamb last week was exceptional. When James left, she tilted her head. You're a regular. Callister looked out at the skyline. I own this building. Silence. This building? Alara repeated. The 68-story building with the marble lobby and the gold elevator? Also the restaurant on 52 and the parking garage? He turned to look at her and the table she had jumped into without asking. His eyes softened. But it's been a long time since someone sat at my table because they needed help instead of money. She'd asked a stranger for 5 minutes of pretend. The stranger owned the building. But here's what matters and what separates this moment from the fantasy version you might be imagining. Alara's first reaction was not excitement. It was not, I've hit the jackpot. What struck her wasn't the wealth. It was the way he looked at her in the thrift store dress, with her dead mother's shoes stuffed with tissue paper. Not down, not up, across, as if the dress and the shoes said nothing about her value and everything about her life. What she didn't know, couldn't know, sitting in that borrowed chair was this. Callister had seen Derek Hale before she sat down. He knew Derek well. 3 years ago, Derek had used forged documents to siphon $200 million from a deal with Wren Capital. Callister hadn't sued, not because the money didn't matter, but because the legal battle would have consumed years. He preferred to invest elsewhere. He also knew the woman in the red dress, Vivian Cross, daughter of the Cross Hotel dynasty, with whom he was negotiating a partnership. When Alara dropped into his chair, trembling, hiding behind a menu, Callister recognized something. Not her face, her fear. The specific fear of someone made to feel small by someone who was supposed to make them feel safe. He knew that fear. His mother had worn it every day of her marriage in Galway before she'd packed a suitcase and two children and taken a flight to New York with nothing but a cousin's phone number in the Bronx. He helped not because she was interesting or because he was bored. He helped her because she was running from the same man who'd stolen from him. That made her not a stranger, but evidence that Derek Hale left wreckage everywhere he went, in boardrooms and in bedrooms alike. But he told her none of that. Not yet. And the reason he didn't tell her is important because a lesser man would have used that information to impress her or manipulate the situation. Callister held it back. He let her be a person first and a puzzle second. That restraint tells you more about his character than any dollar amount ever could. They parted at the elevator an hour later. Callister pressed the down button and stood beside her in a silence that felt comfortable. Most silences with strangers buzzed with pressure. This one simply existed. "Thank you," Alara said, "for the wine, the roses, and not calling security." "Leave your number," he said. "Not for a date. I'm launching a project and I need a brand designer. Anyone who can turn a thrift store dress into that clearly understands design better than 90% of the people I've hired." She tore the corner off a wine list and wrote her number. Steady-handed, she gave it to him, stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. She was 45 minutes late to May's birthday. May handed her Prosecco and said, "You look like you've either committed a crime or fallen in love." "Neither. I think I accidentally applied for a job." 3 days later, 7:14 a.m., unknown number. "Callister Wren, my office, Hudson Yards, 9 tomorrow. Bring your portfolio." He hung up before she could respond. She went, not because she believed it was real. She'd been promised things before. She went because her rent was 3 weeks overdue, and the cafe had cut her shifts, and her Etsy calligraphy orders had dried up because apparently everyone in Brooklyn had already gotten married. His office was on the 40th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson. A desk made of oak chosen for grain, not brand. Bookshelves holding actual used books with cracked spines and post-it notes. No art, no family photos, no awards. "Show me," he said. She opened her portfolio. Not the curated version she planned to build someday, the real one. Restaurant menus, Etsy invitations, freelance logos for businesses too small for brand strategy. 3 spec projects she designed for practice. Concepts for brands that didn't exist. Callister paused on one, a community center concept using negative space to form both a door and a book. "This one, tell me about it." "It doesn't exist, I made it up." "I know. Tell me why." "Because I wanted to design something for a place where people actually go, not a luxury brand. A place where someone walks in feeling lost and walks out feeling less lost." He closed the portfolio. "The project is called Wren Gardens, affordable housing in Red Hook, Brooklyn. Every real estate company would brand it like a luxury development with a conscience. Beautiful graphics, meaningless words. I want it to look like a place people actually want to come home to." "Yes," she said before her brain could object. She looked at the contract figure, closed the folder, opened it again to recount the zeros. "Is this a typo?" "I don't make typos. This is more than I earned all of last year. Then last year underpaid you." There's a lesson embedded in that exchange that goes beyond this story. Alara had been undervaluing herself for years, not because she lacked talent, but because the market she operated in couldn't afford what she was worth. And the person who finally paid her correctly wasn't doing her a favor. He was correcting an error. Sometimes the difference between struggling and thriving isn't ability, it's access. One person, one door, one chance to show your actual work to someone who can actually pay for it. That's not a fairy tale. That's how careers actually change. The first month taught her 2 things about Callister Wren. First, he was nothing like the CEO she'd imagined. He made his own coffee in the shared pantry. Not the private kitchen in his office, but the communal one with the drip machine that produced something one shade above motor oil. When she asked why, He said, "The machine down here is better," which was objectively false. But the security guard, Marco, and the receptionist, Priya, both nodded solemnly with the particular loyalty of people who are seen by someone who doesn't need to see them. He knew every guard's name. He ate lunch at the basement ramen counter where construction workers and interns ate, the cheap one, where delivery drivers fought over the last seat. He never mentioned money, never name-dropped. In meetings, he spoke last, listened first, and asked questions that made his architects shift in their chairs because they exposed gaps that flattery couldn't fill. From her desk on 39, she could see his office through the glass wall one floor above. She told herself she wasn't watching him. She told herself this while watching him pace during phone calls, stand at the window when meetings ran long, and once sit completely still for 10 minutes, staring at the river, holding his coffee with both hands, looking less like a billionaire and more like a man trying to remember something he'd lost. They argued about the logo for 3 days. She wanted sage green, warm, alive, the color of growth. He wanted slate blue, serious, trustworthy, a color that made investors feel safe. 3 days of sketches spread across the conference table until finally she said, "This project isn't for investors. It's for the people who will walk through the front door and decide if it feels like home. Nobody comes home to slate blue." Callister stared at her. "Then sage green it is." At the door, he paused without turning. "For the record, you're the first person in this building who's told me I was wrong about anything in approximately 3 years." "That's a problem," Alara said. "I'm aware." She could have sworn she heard him laugh as he walked down the hall. There were evenings, more than she wanted to admit, when she worked late and found takeout on her desk. No conversation, just a post-it. "Don't starve before the deadline." Once pad thai, once a burrito, once a slice of cake from the Italian place on 10th Avenue, she'd mentioned liking exactly once 3 weeks earlier. He'd remembered. He never brought it up. And one evening, just one, they both stayed past 10 and ended up on the 40th floor balcony watching the Hudson go dark. The city hummed below. Then she said, "The first building I ever owned in was a 2-story wreck in the Bronx. I bought it with everything I'd saved in 10 years, $47,000. I painted it myself, fixed the plumbing, laid the tiles. When it was done, I sat on the front step and thought, this is home." He paused. "I haven't had that feeling since." And without thinking, Alara said, "Every building starts with a home. Maybe you stopped building homes and started building buildings." He turned to look at her. Something crossed his face, quick, unguarded, gone before she could name it. He didn't respond, but he didn't look away. Remember that line? Every building starts with a home, because Callister didn't forget it either. And what he does with it later will tell you everything you need to know about who this man really is. Second, he disappeared every Wednesday at 5 without explanation. His calendar blocked as personal. The entire office understood Wednesdays after 5 were a wall no one climbed. One Wednesday, working late on color revisions, she saw him leave through the side entrance. No jacket, white t-shirt, jeans, messenger bag. She followed. Curiosity, she told herself, not surveillance. 3 subway stops later, she stood outside a building on the Lower East Side. The sign, RA Community Center, free English classes. Through the wire-meshed window, she saw Callister at a folding table in the back. Across from him, an elderly man with weathered hands, holding a pencil like a tool he was still learning to trust. Callister pointed at a workbook, mouth moving slowly, patient, unhurried. No Rolex, a t-shirt washed enough times to forget its original color. Paint stains on his jeans. He looked for the first time since she'd met him, completely comfortable. No cameras, no press releases, no foundation galas, just fluorescent lights, folding chairs, and a billionaire teaching an immigrant to read. This is the moment that separates Callister Wren from every rich man saves poor girl story you've ever heard. Because charity with cameras is marketing. Charity without cameras is character. And a man who takes off his Rolex before sitting down at a folding table isn't performing humility. He's remembering where he came from. Alara understood. He didn't volunteer for his image. He came because he recognized this room, because he'd sat in rooms like this. She'd learned the full story in fragments, the way you learn anything real about a person. Born in Galway, Ireland, arrived in New York at 6 with his mother and brother, A father whose love came in bottles and whose anger came in fists. His mother, Siobhan, changing bed sheets in a nursing home for $12 an hour. A studio apartment in Woodlawn, Bronx. Library books, night shifts, $47,000 saved over a decade to buy a crumbling two-story house. He painted it himself, plumbed it himself, tiled it himself, and when it was done, sitting on the front steps thinking, this is mine, this is home. It was also the moment she realized she was in trouble. Because the warmth she felt when he left takeout on her desk at midnight, no words, just a post-it saying, "Don't starve before the deadline," was not professional gratitude. It was the thing she'd sworn after Derek never to feel again. Month 2, the Wren Gardens launch at the Wren Gallery in Chelsea. 200 guests, investors, architects, press, the walls covered in Alara's work, logo, color palette, tagline, the full brand identity printed on every poster, every cocktail napkin, every screen. Before the event, Callister sent a box. Inside, a champagne silk dress. Simple, perfectly cut. A handwritten note. This isn't a gift. It's a uniform for my lead designer. If you show up in the blush pink, everyone will look at you instead of the work. She read it 3 times. Then she laughed freely for the first time in his presence. The evening unfolded. Alara watched strangers study her work, discuss her choices. A woman from Architectural Digest found her at the bar. "Who are you? I've never heard your name, but this is the best brand identity I've seen all year." Alara managed to say thank you without crying. Then Derek arrived. He was on the guest list. Hale Properties competed in the same space, and Derek attended rival events the way generals attend enemy parades to count soldiers and identify weaknesses. He entered with Vivian Cross on his arm. Same red dress, same dark hair, same arrangement of beauty deployed as asset. Derek saw Alara, his eyes swept from her to the nearest poster, her logo, her name in the credits. Then to Callister standing 3 feet away. She watched him calculate. She'd seen that look before on the night he'd told her she didn't belong. The rapid inventory of someone's usefulness, cross-referenced against their cost. He crossed the room, smile first, magnetic, practiced, the exact same one she'd mistaken for warmth for 14 months. "Alara, it's been so long. You look different." Different. Not beautiful, not successful. Different. A word that acknowledged change while declining to call it improvement. Derek's vocabulary had always been surgical. Callister placed his hand on the back of Alara's chair, not on her, near her. A perimeter without intrusion. He looked at Derek the way he looked at spreadsheets, with complete attention and zero emotional investment. "Derek, I hear Hale Properties lost the Greenwich Village bid. Unfortunate." 3 sentences, each one a chess piece. Derek's smile stiffened. The 2 men looked at each other and understood. They knew each other, and between them lay something deeper than business. Derek turned back to her, leaned close. "Call me when you get tired of being someone's decoration." He walked away. The words settled like a splinter. Small, sharp, placed exactly where he knew she was weakest. Was she decoration? Was she here because Callister allowed it? The champagne dress, charity, the contract, mercy, and this is what makes Derek dangerous. Not anger, not cruelty in the obvious sense, but precision. He knew exactly where Alara's insecurity lived, and he went there with surgical accuracy. People like Derek don't yell. They whisper, and the whisper always lands harder. Callister didn't ask what Derek said. He simply stood beside her and said, "Your sage green was the right call. I should have trusted you from the start." Not comfort, respect. A fact about her work. And respect, she was learning, was the only antidote to a wound made by contempt. 2 weeks later, the crack appeared. Alara was searching the internal server for a file. She clicked the wrong folder. Red Hook Property Analysis. Inside, dozens of documents. The land beneath Wren Gardens had been, 3 years ago, a housing complex for 47 low-income families. Callister had acquired it through rezoning and condemnation agreements. Every family relocated 4 miles south, payments made, compliance documented, but attached, complaints. An 83-year-old woman now 4 miles from her dialysis hospital, a family of 5 whose children transferred to a school without ESL. Three households still fighting in court. Alara closed the laptop. She stared at her own logo on the wall, the leaf and doorway symbol she designed to mean belonging, and thought about her mother. Her mother, who'd lost their apartment in Ashford when Alara was 16 because the building sold to a developer, who moved 3 times in 2 years while her health collapsed, who died in a Brooklyn apartment that wasn't home, but was at least permanent. Wren Gardens, he said, Gardens, the project she designed to represent where you begin, was built where someone else's beginning had been erased. And this is where the story gets complicated. The way real life is always more complicated than we want it to be. Because Callister isn't the villain of Red Hook, but he isn't entirely the hero either. The building was condemned. The families would have been displaced regardless. He paid more for relocation than any developer in Brooklyn history, but more and enough are not the same thing. And Alara knew that because her mother had lived the difference. She found Callister in the hallway at 4:30. He was holding coffee, reading his phone. She didn't wait. You relocated those families. You knew and you didn't tell me. I designed a brand I thought was for people like me, and it's built on top of people exactly like me. He lowered the phone, didn't argue, didn't deflect. His silence confirmed what she feared. She wasn't entirely wrong. The building was condemned 5 years before I bought it, he said finally. If I hadn't, a consortium with no relocation policy would have. I spent $14 million on the transition fund alone, but I know money doesn't replace the memory of a home. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid of exactly the way you're looking at me right now. Alara left, walked out of Ren Capital, didn't text, didn't call, went home, sat on her bed, looked at the champagne dress on the door. Every beautiful thing from 3 months, work, sunsets on the balcony, midnight takeout, his laugh, all of it had a crack she couldn't unsee. 2 days later, Derek called. How he got her number, she didn't know. His voice was warm, concerned, perfectly calibrated to someone in pain. I heard you left Ren Capital. If you need work, Hale Properties has a spot for you. I know how talented you are. For one heartbeat, she almost said yes, because the loneliness was real and the anger was real, and a familiar voice in a dark moment is exactly the kind of trap that works because you're too tired to resist. Then she remembered. 11:47 p.m. You don't belong in my world. The breadbasket, the $10 tip, the rain. Derek wasn't calling because he cared. He was calling because she'd been inside Ren Capital for 3 months and whatever she knew had value. She was a data point. She had always been a data point. She hung up. And that moment, the moment she hung up, is quietly the most important decision in this entire story. Not the rooftop, not the confrontation, not the love story, this. Because Alara could have gone back. The door was open, the voice was familiar. And familiar when you're hurting feels a lot like safe. But she learned something in 2 years of rebuilding. Familiar and safe are not the same thing. And sometimes the bravest thing you could do is hang up the phone. A week of silence. She went back to cafe shifts and freelance scraps. The fire escape with a $12 bottle of rosé, Brooklyn pretending to be Paris. May came over on Thursday with Thai food and sat on the floor, the only place that wasn't the bed. May Tanaka, who had hired Alara when no agency would, who texted her every morning with a different emoji that meant "I believe in you" in a language they'd invented, who had never once said "I told you so" about Derek even when she'd earned the right every single day for 14 months of punishing herself for trusting someone. May said, separating noodles with chopsticks, "That's not justice, that's habit. I'm not punishing myself, I'm being realistic. His world and my world aren't the same." May set down her chopsticks. Whose words are those? Yours or Derek's? She stared at the noodles because she heard it. The echo. You don't belong in my world. She'd been repeating Derek's verdict for 2 years, repackaging it as wisdom, wearing it like armor when it had always been a cage. She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Next morning, May sent a link. The City, New York's investigative news site. Headline, Billionaire Ren announces $30 million fund for schools, clinics at Red Hook relocation site. Largest community investment in Brooklyn history. Alara Reid on the subway, standing, gripping the bar with one hand and her phone with the other. A school with ESL programs. a clinic within walking distance, a community garden. Every facility designed with input from the relocated families. And at the bottom, Mr. Wren stated the initiative will be called the Eleanor Foundation, inspired by an individual who reminded him that every building begins with a home. Eleanor, not close enough to be unmistakable. And the phrase, every building begins with a home. She'd said that to him on the balcony, talking about her mother, about the apartment in Ashford. He hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't sent flowers. He'd taken the things she said were broken and built something to fix it. Not to win her back, because she was right. That was the only apology that meant anything to Alara. Not words, action. And that's the difference between a grand gesture and a real one. A grand gesture is for the person watching. A real one is for the person who was hurt. Callister didn't name the foundation after her. He named it Eleanor. Close enough that she'd know. Different enough that she'd understand. This isn't about us. This is about them, the families, the homes, the thing you told me I got wrong. He didn't apologize with a speech. He apologized with $30 million of schools and a clinic. And he didn't ask for credit. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just built. She put the phone away and looked up volunteer programs on the Lower East Side. She chose a Wednesday at the RA Community Center, fluorescent lights, folding tables, instant coffee. She'd signed up to teach basic design skills to young immigrants. She arrived at 6 with a laptop and printed handouts she designed herself. Callister was at his usual table in the back, working with a young woman over a workbook. He looked up when she walked in. He didn't stand, didn't walk toward her. He nodded, small, quiet, with no demand in it. A nod that said, I see you. I know you're here for you, not for me. She nodded back, sat down at her table, began teaching. After the session, they walked out into the Lower East Side night. October air, roasted nuts from street carts, salsa music from a corner bar, the smell of fresh bread from a bakery still open, its window glowing yellow. They walked a block in silence. Then Callister said, I can't undo the past. Those families moved, and no amount of schools erases the kitchens where they cooked Thanksgiving or the walls where they measured their kids' heights. But I can choose how I build from here, and you changed how I choose. Alara stopped, looked at him, and said what she'd held inside for 3 months. I'm scared, Callister. Last time I trusted a man with money, he dumped me by text and said I didn't belong in his world. Your world is enormous, and I buy dresses at thrift stores and stuff my dead mother's shoes with tissue paper. I'm scared because I have feelings for you, and I don't know if that's worth the risk. He turned to face her, gray blue eyes in yellow streetlight, and he spoke. Not the CEO voice, not the billionaire voice, but the voice of a boy from Woodlawn, Bronx. I own 17 buildings, none of them is home. Home was when someone sat at my table shaking and asked me to pretend. Home was someone fighting me about sage green versus slate blue and winning. Home was someone saying every building starts with a home and making me realize I'd forgotten that for 10 years. He paused. You don't need to belong in my world. You just need to be here because wherever you are, that's the only place I want to build. Alara looked at him. Then she said, that's the longest thing I've ever heard you say. Did you rehearse it? No, but I can say it shorter if you want. Say it. Stay. And right then, because life has timing no screenwriter could match, Derek Hale stepped out of the bar on the corner. He saw them. His face darkened. He crossed the sidewalk with the particular stride of a man who'd had enough gin to mistake anger for courage, but not enough to blur his aim. Alara, seriously. You know what he does? He tears down homes to build towers. You told me what happened to your mother, and now you're choosing someone who does the same thing. The words hit their target. Alara stepped back half a pace because Derek was wrong about almost everything. But he was right about this. She had told him about her mother in the early months when she thought intimacy meant giving someone your wounds to hold. She hadn't known he'd been cataloging them, filing them under leverage, saving them for exactly this kind of moment. Callister looked at Derek, calm, not performed calm, but the structural calm of a man who decided long ago which battles deserved his energy. Derek, 3 years ago, you defrauded my company of $200 million with forged authorization documents. I didn't sue because my time was worth more than your consequences. But if you want to discuss real estate ethics, explain first why Vivian Cross just hired a litigation team to sue you for leveraging her family's hotel assets as unauthorized collateral. Derek went white, not anger white, exposure white. He turned and walked away fast enough to almost qualify as running. Alara watched him go, the man who told her she didn't belong, the man whose voice had narrated her inadequacy for 2 years. She watched him leave for the second time in her life, and she felt nothing. No, not nothing, light. The lightness of setting down a weight carried so long she'd forgotten it had edges. Derek hadn't left her because, quote, she lacked value. He'd left because he didn't know what value was. And that realization that the rejection was never about you, it was always about them, is the thing that sets people free. Not forgiveness, not revenge, not closure, just clarity. The understanding that some people leave not because you weren't enough, but because they don't have the capacity to recognize enough when they see it. She turned to Callister. He stood with his hands in his pockets. Not a hero, not a rescuer, just a man on a sidewalk waiting for her to choose. She stepped toward him. Okay, I'll stay. One condition. What? Next time you order late-night food to the office, ask me what I want first. Stop deciding for me. Fought. He laughed, the fullest sound she'd heard from him. Not the controlled exhale of the rooftop or the dry amusement of meetings. A real laugh from a place that had been locked a long time. He took her hand. She held his. 6 months later, Alara opened Vos & Company in a small building in Dumbo, Brooklyn. Not in any building he owned. Rented with money she earned from the Wren Gardens project, which won the New York Design Association's award for Best Brand Identity, with her name on it, not his, and from 4 new clients that reputation brought. 3 employees, a window overlooking the East River. On the wall, a photograph of a Hudson River sunset shot from the 40th floor balcony. Callister had taken it when she wasn't looking. She'd found it in an envelope on her desk the morning she left Wren Capital. No note. She'd framed it anyway. Her mother would have liked this office. Small, imperfect, full of light. The kind of place where you could sit at a desk and think, this is mine. This is where I build. Callister was still making coffee in the shared pantry, ramen in the basement, teaching on Wednesdays. But now Alara sat beside him at the center every Wednesday night, showing young immigrants how to use design software, how to turn a skill into a portfolio into a job. On the wall, a poster she designed, every building starts with a home. The Eleanor Foundation opened in Red Hook on a Saturday in March. School, clinic, community garden. Built with input from the families who'd been relocated, their names on the advisory board, their children's artwork on the classroom walls. 3 families who'd been in legal disputes had settled, not through lawyers, but through a process where the families sat at the same table as the developers and spoke directly about what they'd lost. It didn't erase the past, nothing could, but it gave them something none of them had expected. A voice. Alara was asked to speak at the ribbon cutting. She stood at the podium, looking at the families, people who'd lost their homes now sitting in bright chairs with children on their laps. Some skeptical, some hopeful, most somewhere in between. And she said, I know you lost a home. No one has the right to say that didn't hurt. But I also know that sometimes losing a place is the only way to find a better one. My mother taught me that. She lost 3 apartments before she found the last one, and she never stopped calling it temporary. I wish she'd lived long enough to call somewhere permanent. Alara paused. Her throat was tight, but her voice held. I'm standing here, not as a designer, but as someone who lost a home too, to tell you this is yours now, and it will still be here tomorrow. Callister stood in the back of the room, and for the first time since she'd known him, he didn't hide what he felt. His eyes were red, his hands were still. He looked at her the way she'd looked at his office that first morning, not calculating what was there, but recognizing that what was there was enough. That evening on the rooftop of the Meridian Terrace, the same table, the same corner, a glass of Whispering Angel rosé already poured, white roses. When Alara sat down, she didn't reach for the menu. She didn't need a shield. She didn't need to hide. She sat in the same chair she'd crashed into 8 months ago, trembling and desperate. And she was not trembling now. The server approached. What can I get for you this evening? Callister looked at her and he said, Ask her. I don't make her decisions anymore. Alara smiled. Not the careful smile she'd assembled from panic that first night. A real one, warm, steady, entirely hers. She ordered. On her wrist, the bracelet caught the candlelight. Keep going. She had kept going all the way here. To the right table, to the right chair. To the person who never asked her to be anything other than exactly who she was. And here she was learning was not a rooftop or a restaurant or a building with someone else's name on it. Here was wherever she chose to stand. For the first time in her life, she was choosing. If this story stayed with you, if Alara's courage or Callister's quiet kindness or that silver bracelet meant something to you tonight, then you stayed for a reason. Thank you for being here until the very last word. That means everything. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. New tales of love, courage, and second chances drop every day. See you in the next.